I'm going to give you 5 useful tools. Starting with today, talking about brain basics, I'm going to give you some foundational information that we're going to use over the next 4 sessions. The idea is that we're going to be putting together information that's kind of like a college class today. Next week, we're going to talk about just right challenges and cognitive reserve capacity, and I'm going to explain that in just a bit. And the third week, we're going to talk about using brain restorative sleep to postpone dementia. And notice that I don't say cure dementia. We can't cure dementia. But we know enough about the risk factors for dementia that if we can manage those risk factors, we appear to be able to postpone some of them. So the point is, we can't cure dementia. Most of the dementias we talk about these days, about 2/3 are Alzheimer's. And the Alzheimer dementia there are multiple different versions of it we're learning, multiple different causes. And that's good to know. What is still eluding us is how to cure it. In the second and third classes, I'm going to give some tools to manage some of the more important risk factors so that you can postpone the onset of it, so you can maintain your high quality of life as long as you can. You know, it's a concern that we all have. The older you get, the more likely it is that you're going to have one or another dementia. There are now things we can do about it we didn't know about at the turn of the century. Now we're going to be talking about a different approach to exercise and nutrition that is going to be a challenge for you, and I think a good challenge. The idea is we're going to look at your brain-body homeostasis, that is the balance that you have between your brain and your body, and how different kinds of medicines make you feel, how different kinds of nutritions make you feel, how different kinds of exercises make you feel. Because all of those, what we're talking about in this course, is your brain being integrated with your body and there being a reciprocal relationship so that your brain is affected by different foods, different medicines, different types of exercise in positive and negative ways. And guess who's the best person to know about what's good and bad for you? It's you. So I'll be talking with you about how you pay attention and work with your doc to help you get properly medicated if you need medicine, proper exercise, proper nutrition, those kinds of things. I'm going to give you some resources to be able to do that. But you're the final common thread back to your doc to provide information to him or her about how a medicine is working, how an exercise is working, how I'm doing this, that, or the other thing. And then finally, this is our target. I want to have us have high quality of life longevity, not just longevity, high quality of life longevity. And that involves community integration. Mary and I moved here about 1.5 years ago from the Midwest. One of the most exciting pieces of being in this town is OLLI. And that's because we have community connectivity. It's really a wonderful organization. There are several people here who this is their first OLLI course. Fantastic. It's a great opportunity to learn. It's a great opportunity to get to know each other. So let's go ahead and get started. This is your brain at the top of your nervous system. We're going to be focusing on the brain today. It's about 2.5 to 3 pounds of tissue. It's about 1.5 to 2% of your body mass. 1.5 to 2% of your body mass, a tiny piece of your body mass. And it's not just sending signals to your body, it's receiving signals from your body. And that's important to pay attention to. There's this reciprocal relationship we're going to be talking about, going back and forth. Part of your brain health is to have good information coming in from your body, to have your body stimulate your brain. Part of your body health is to have good signals coming out from your brain down to your body and, for instance, taking care of your heart. Now, we didn't realize until maybe 30 years ago that we could really talk about brain health and fitness. But we realize now that we have to pay attention to the brain and the heart together. And there's actually important linkages between the brain and the heart. We'll talk about some of those linkages. The point to start with is that they are linked. The linkages are meaningful to both. You have a happier, healthier heart to the degree your brain is happier and healthier. I first got started in this doing research back in the mid-70s that was stimulated by something called the sudden death syndrome. Back in the mid-70s, we didn't know we knew that sudden death syndrome happened because people were dropping dead. We didn't know why. and they appeared to be dropping dead of heart attacks. It turns out that the brain of these people were, every single one of them, severely depressed. They would get stressed, boom, like that, they drop dead. Now we understand what the mechanisms are. And so one of the issues that we started to look at is the interconnectivity of the brain and the heart. That is some really important ways we need to pay attention to. So here's your brain, wonderful, depending on how old you are, 80 to 200 billion neurons. This morning I counted, I got up early, I've got 81,943,766,843, 42, 41, 40, 39. This is my wife. I'm in a hurry because my neurons are just leaving left and right. The nice thing though, I've got a lot of them. And we've got many more than we really need. We were born, about 21 days after your mom and dad got together and you were conceived, you started developing your brain. And in the first couple of days, it looked like a cone. What are those ice cream cones that are made out of waffle cones? Remember those? It looks just like a waffle cone the first couple of weeks of life. At the bottom of the waffle cone is a little popcorn popper. And stem cells are being turned into neurons. Actually, millions an hour. Millions an hour. And those stem cells turn into neurons. Those neurons then migrate up to the top, and this is what eventually becomes the top of your brain, called the cerebral cortex. And some of those neurons migrate down and becomes your spinal cord. And each of those neurons has between 3 and 10,000 connections. And each is a really important thing to pay attention to. It's not like you've got 10,000 connections in your brain. You've got 80 billion times 3 to 10,000, which is a lot of connections. And this part of your brain, actually, this is called the cerebellum, actually has about 30 to 50,000 connections between for each neuron, each single neuron. The complexity is absolutely astounding. Back around the turn of the century, several of the bigger computer companies were trying to develop, using a new model to develop supercomputers. And the new model they were playing with, that they have adopted in large part, is the human brain. So IBM said, if we're going to develop a supercomputer based upon the human brain, what's our target in terms of the number of operations that the human brain can perform? And so IBM did this study, identified 38 quadrillion operations. Don't fall over, I'm glad you're sitting down. But isn't that amazing? And that's your brain. That's why we need to take naps. Because this little 2.5 to 3 pounds of flesh, maybe 1.5 to 2% of our body weight uses 10 times as much oxygen as it should, 20% of our glucose. So that's basically what we're looking at with, sometimes call it an energy hog. And one of the issues here, just to remind you of the interrelationship between the brain and the heart and the brain and the nervous system, is that one of the things you'll hear me talking about a lot is fitness, aerobic fitness, walking is really important for brain health and fitness. And as you go throughout the day, this 20% will go up at times to 25% and down at times to 15%. And some of it will be under your control. So for example, the glucose comes out of your liver. And if you are drinking too much and not eating properly, your liver is going to struggle to keep you at 20%. So when you are very active and doing a lot of learning, so your brain is really being pushed, you're going to get fatigued more quickly because your liver just can't produce the energy that the brain needs. But if you were to back off on your drinking and start working on your nutrition and your exercise program, then your liver is going to come right back, which it really is good at doing, and get back to providing good support for the energy your brain needs. So, what is taking up all that energy? Well, this is the little bugger that's doing it. It's called a neuron. I had an artist draw this up. That we don't really know how many different types of neurons there are, but they follow this basic game plan. The neuron has a cell body, and in the cell body is its nucleus. In the nucleus, it's got about 17,000 to 19,000 genes, approximately. And several hundred of those are turned on if the neuron's going to be one type of neuron. Some of those are turned off, and others are turned on if the neuron's going to be another type of neuron. Complexity is amazing. We've got a long way to go to figure out how many different types of neurons there are. There are three classes of neurons, though. There's a neuron that signals sensation, that sends that signal up to my brain, so I know that I've touched something. There's a neuron that sends signals down to my finger. So there's a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. Most of the neurons in the brain associate with each other. They're interrelated neurons. So there's a cell body there. There's an axon, this little tail here, and this is covered with some stuff called myelin. It's actually made out of cholesterol. So cholesterol is not just bad. Cholesterol is an important ingredient for your diet, for your brain. Your brain needs good levels of cholesterol, adequate levels of cholesterol. What your brain does with that cholesterol is to wrap the axon with this sheath to help send the signals down faster. If it doesn't have a sheath, it's much slower. People with multiple sclerosis have some of the myelin missing. Now, not every neuron has myelin around it, but the faster neurons do. And if you have MS, one of the problems with MS is that that little sheath begins to break down. And dendrites out at the end, those little hairy things out there, are looking for love. They're out there reaching out and saying, does anybody want to come visit me? Please, please, I'm right over here. And by the way, a neuron that's not used will die. So if the neuron isn't attractive enough to another neuron to have people come visit and shake hands, that dendrite is going to just shrink up and the neuron itself will eventually die. Most of the neurons you will die with, you were born with, or at least you were developed in your body in the first 18 months since gestation. So by the time you're 2 years old, you've got almost all the neurons, but most of the neurons you die with are ones that were there when you were a toddler. Isn't that amazing? One of the longest living cells in your body. So what happens here? The signal gets generated from here, sends down the axon to a synapse, comes in, boom, 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 and goes off to the synapse, and that goes off to another neuron, and it continues to send the signal down. Now, one of the things that computer scientists are excited about is that this neuron acts like what's called a diode in a computer. The basic form of the computer switch is a diode. It's an on-off switch. It's a no-go, no-go switch. And every neuron sends a signal down to send to the next neuron, go, 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 or stop, 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 stop. It will actually turn off or inhibit the next neuron. So the complexity is then multiplied by many factors because it's got that on-off ability. But most of the action takes place here in this synapse, it's called. This is a chemical bridge. Any of us who've used antidepressant medication, this is where the action takes place. Antidepressant medication increases the molecules that are crossing that bridge, not by putting more in there, but by stopping them from being sucked back up. So this is what happens in the synapse. This is the axon coming down to the dendrite down here. And these are little globules of, let's say, serotonin. Serotonin is a really important neurochemical for us to feel good about ourselves. It makes us feel calm, relaxed. When people have a problem with depression, one of the chemical changes that occurs is that they don't have enough serotonin to cross this bridge. So it's coming down here, and the little molecules are crossing the bridge, but not enough to get the signal to pass from here to here fast enough. Basically, it's because you don't have the energy coming across this bridge. So they're called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. They block the reuptake of these. So after these go down and shoot the signal across, they don't get killed. They're still very active. They get sucked back up here. What the SSRIs do is stop them from being sucked up back so quickly. So over a period of several days and weeks, and if you've taken them, it takes weeks for the SSRIs to take effect. The density, the number of of the molecules in this gap increases, and then boom, 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 the signal is passed appropriately from one neuron to the next. This is a type of MRI called a diffusion tensor image. In each of these, this is a relatively old diffusion tensor image. In each of these strands, there are at least 100,000 neurons, axons. Isn't that amazing? And the reason I like to use this slide is that we're going to be talking about neural networks. A neuron doesn't do much by itself. Neurons need to link into networks to get the job done. One of the groups of people I work with a lot are folks with concussions. Combat in Afghanistan and Iraq have produced a lot of people with concussions because they've been near an explosion. The blast wave goes through the Humvee that they're in, goes through their Kevlar helmet, and is not stopped by the Humvee or the Kevlar helmet. It goes through their cranium, not stopped there, and it ripples through this really soft tissue. And the cell body of the neuron gets hit at the same time the axon gets hit, and unfortunately there's a break here very often. And so the axon breaks away from the cell body, and we think the cells die at that point. We're not sure about that, by the way, but it's not doing the cell any good. And remember, the axon is necessary for the signal to be sent along, so it's, even if it's not dead, it's not very helpful anymore. One of the things I want to point out is that we can still develop those neural networks. By the end of the day, in just a few minutes, you're going to see an introduction to that. You should leave here today, and really by the end of the course, with a lot of hope, because we've learned a lot about how things work. So this is a neuron firing. So this particular neuron, let's say it's dedicated to the concept of apple. It's a network. We'll call it a neural developmental network that uses neuroplasticity to promote adaptation. So in your brain right now, you are stringing together a bunch of neurons to make sense of the word neuroplasticity, so you can explain it to your grandkids. Your brain is right now putting that together. It's recruiting information from your history, something you may never have seen this word before, never knew about this definition, but your brain is actively putting that together so you can use it. It's helping you adapt to the world. Every time that signal goes through there, it's strengthening the link to the next neuron. And the neuron can be involved with many different networks. But it's the combination of neurons that produce the meaning for you. So I was going to use the example of apple. Apple is something that we've got neural networks that we developed when we were children, so that we know that this picture goes with that word. The picture and the word aren't stored in the same place in the brain. In Vicky's brain, the picture is processed back here. The word is processed over here. And for her to be able to understand what that word is, there's a part of her brain right above her left ear that's got that information. If she's going to tell me, what is that? What is that? Apple. There was another part of her brain right off of her left cheek that got its act together enough for her to say, apple. Those are all links that were developed when she was a little girl. This is Alice, and before she's got words, she's learning about apple. Her parents have taken her to go pick apples, and she's a nice sunny day. She's got some beautiful little sweater she's got on. Over the next couple of years, she develops this really positive relationship with apples. They make her happy, good memories from the past, even before she had words. Now about here, she's probably got 200 words, one of which is apple. She learns that apples are something that you can share with people and promote friendship. She's got these other kinds of relationships to the word apple. Apple has to do with love in Alice's experience. Apple's just a positive sort of thing for Alice. So much so that She just has fun with apples when she's growing up. She's just an apple kind of kid. And later on, when she goes to Chico State, she starts looking for a man who can be a good dad, who loves apples. And so she found William, and William is a great dad. He's doing a great job introducing little Willie, Alice's little baby son, to apples, and the life starts continuing its saga. The problem is that William is an art history major, doesn't make much money, and so she's had to go to work for this company, putting in 60 hours a week to pay the light bill. But you see what happened there. We've generalized from something that we got pre-verbally all the way through. And so there's, even though it's just a simple construct, apple, how many simple constructs do you have? Hundreds of thousands of those. Not just in the apple family, there are probably dozens of constructs. Most of that information is stored in the cerebral cortex, the top part of the brain. There are two hemispheres here, left and right hemisphere. They're connected by a bunch of axons. And the right hemisphere controls the left part of your brain, the left part of your body. The left hemisphere controls the right part of your body. What do you notice about these? One's a lot bigger than the other. What do you think the difference is? Male, female. That's the difference. Which is the male, which is the female?
Female's the biggest.
Female's the biggest? No, the female is the smaller one.
Are you sure?
I am sure about that. Which one has more neurons? No, they both have the same. Now, how is that possible? In a smaller space, how do you get more neurons? You wrinkle them up. You wrinkle it. That's why it's so wrinkled. If you work in a cadaver lab, one of the things that's possible to do, we don't do it because it's just a waste of brain, but you can actually lay out the covering of the brain, and it's about like this. It's like a real big dinner napkin. Underneath the cerebral cortex is the limbic system. I want you to put your hands out like this. Put your thumb over, grab like this, put your hands together. That's the hand model of the brain. And you've got your two cerebral cortices here. You've got your cerebral cortex on top, your two hemispheres here. Underneath here, you've got your limbic system. Your limbic system is we call your emotional brain, and they're linked up together. So what part of the brain gets activated first by, for instance, sensations? When your heart starts to beat fast, which part of your brain knows about that first? It's your limbic system. It's down here. It's your emotional brain. The emotional brain gets the response that you're afraid or excited or happy or whatever the heart has started to beat harder for. And the thinking brain on top then interprets that about a third of a second later. We want to think about ourselves as being really rational people. It's actually the other way around. We're primarily emotional people who need to explain what our emotions are. And that's an important issue to keep in mind as you move through life. You are more emotional and irrational than you think. And that's an important part of what I think is happening in OLLI, for us to have civil conversations about sometimes difficult topics, allowing our thinking brains to kind of to work more rationally, because our emotional brains aren't kicked off by some political discussion or religious discussion or something like that. This is us at 20 years old. This is us at 80 years old. What do you see? This is something you can't avoid. None of us have been able to avoid this. So we've lost some neurons. That's inevitable. Our neurons are firing more slowly, though, too. Almost all cells in your body have a little clock. There's a little clock in almost every cell in your body. And the clocks for your cells in your heart gradually slow down. The clocks for the cells in your brain and nervous system gradually slow down. And that's just how we're designed. And it has to do in the cell with every time the cell fires, it goes through a polarization, depolarization process. And that involves chemicals going back and forth through the cell body, and that just slows down. If you are real fit, and they've done some work with master's level athletes, especially master's level swimmers, the cells in the heart muscle can continue to maintain a youthful response speed for another couple decades. But inevitably they slow down too, even if you're a master athlete. So you can do some things about it, but all is not lost. I mean, if we were to look at the difference here, we could say, well, I'm just going to wrap it up on my way home. I'm not used to anybody. How can I? And I'm embarrassed to admit this to my grandkids. But there's an offset. And the offset is that we have mature neural networks. Over the course of our growth, from little Alice with the apple, to all those things that she learned about and related to apple, including finding a husband who was a good father and could pass on, and so on and so forth, we have developed massive neural networks that have to do with wisdom. And over the next week, I'm going to be talking about how we can actually participate in developing those neural networks. And this is new science. It's been around for about 15, 20 years now, but I'll be sharing that with you next week. I call it wisdom. It's a different kind of intelligence. I heard it described on Robin McNeil after Jim Lehrer died a couple of nights ago. He said he had moral intelligence. And that really comes, that's another acronym for wisdom, or another synonym for wisdom. The neural networks that Bill has in his brain now that have to do with making a good decision are much more complex than Bill's grandson. Bill's grandson's got the speed that we saw over here. Bill's slower over here, but who's going to make a better decision in a complex situation? If it has to be made like this, it's not Bill. But if you're able to think about it for a couple of minutes, it's going to be Bill. And we just see that time and time and time again. What keeps a company from recognizing that? Why do we get age discrimination? And part of it is that there are some traditions around that say that you're slowing down and you're not worth anything. But the point is, we really do have some offsets that are terrific. So the reason I wanted to talk about the hippocampus before we wrap up today, it's crucial for our brain health and development. Going back to our hand model, if we have our hands like this, the hippocampus is our little finger, okay? Does that make sense? The hippocampus is where all the information coming in is stored temporarily. So right now, you're hearing me speak, you're watching this, you're taking in a lot of information. It's stored for just a few hours. Some of that information will get made into long-term memories, but 99% of it will just be lost. Some of it will be retained. The information that's going to be retained is the information that has more of an emotional link to it. Bang! Hippocampus. That will help you remember the word hippocampus because you've right now got a little bit of emotion going. The word hippocampus, which is like Alice and her apple, unfortunately may not have a positive connotation for you right now. Next week I'm going to have you fall in love with your hippocampus. It's where information is processed before it's made into long-term memories, and on that basis, depending upon what we put into our hippocampus, determines what we remember in the long run. And things like values are really crucial there. So we'll be talking a lot about how to use our hippocampus. I like to call it harnessing our hippocampus to develop long-term values to deal with things like depression and anxiety and so forth. Hippocampus is the first place we go to bring about changes in the brain for many reasons. The first place we go to postpone dementia. Okay, and to wrap up, I'm going to give you some aging resources. This is a good book. Dan Levitin, it's available at Amazon, and the Kindle is the one I recommend, but paperback's fine too. Then I want to encourage you to go to Google Scholar. I don't know how many of you use Google Scholar. It's free. You can you don't have to sign up for it. Just go to Google and put in Scholar, and then there's a separate section in Google that you can look for different topics. So for example, I put in the term successful aging, about 3,120,000 results. Yikes! back in the mid-60s when Medicare got started, that would have been maybe 1,000. We have generated tremendous interest throughout the world in aging and successful aging. So I want to take you through this. What I've done is to search for successful aging at any time. This is me taking you through a Google search, Google Scholar search. And these come up. And when you see this over here, that means it's a PDF that you can click and download. It's free. Those are pretty neat. Now, why would you click that particular one out of 3,120,000? Well, it's been cited by 7,500 folks. That is 7,500. This particular article back in 1997 has stimulated a tremendous amount of research. You could call it a classic or a foundational article, and it's free for you to download. So if you're interested in looking at this in more detail, then that would be a resource for you. Let's take a look, instead of looking at just successful aging, let's look at successful aging models. And let's look just since 2016. Instead of 3 million, it's only 122,000. So it's focusing it in, and it's got a lot more things you can download. This particular link takes you to something called PubMed, which is another free resource. So these are all free resources that are readily available, and there's no charge to sign up. If you do sign up, they will help you keep track of your library, so that's useful. This is another one called the Cochrane Library. This is free. This is kind of like OLLI in England focused on research. It's a bunch of folks like us who are retired, who are really interested in healthcare. And there are some physicians, some scientists, some just regular folks who are interested in a particular topic. So for example, I did a search this morning on the word dementia. And I came up with 191 Cochrane reviews. Now Cochrane is all funded by philanthropy. They won't accept money from any drug companies so they're the clearinghouse. Now they're really tough. They're very, very tough on saying what works and what doesn't work. And they use folks like us to say, this doesn't make sense, or it does make sense. So this is a real good place for all of us to turn when we have questions. For example, this one, omega-3 fatty acids for the treatment of dementia. I'm sure there are people who are concerned about that. If I take in fish oil, will it help with dementia? If I eat a lot of salmon or anchovies, will it help with dementia? Well, I can give you an opinion, but the fair, even-handed expert opinion from people who've really studied it and don't have a dog in the fight are these folks. And back in 2016, and that's the PICO, by the way, this is PICO stands for Population Intervention Comparison and Outcomes. So very quickly, this is a very easy site to use. You click on things and you'll come up with stuff that you're interested in. If you've got an interest in, for instance, omega-3 fatty acids and dementia, this is where you'd go. And then you can go and actually decide whether or not you want to download this article. Some of them cost $7. This one is free. And you can download it, and then you know more than your doc probably knows, because this is recent stuff and really heavily researched. So what we've covered today is that neural networks grow by being nurtured. Brain slowing is compensated for by network development. And next week, we're going to talk about how to protect and nurture a healthy hippocampus. So I hope that you're starting to feel a little hopeful. I mean, I know there's a lot of information here, but it's all fully understandable. Remember, I'll be putting together a little YouTube video that I'll send you the link to at the end of the day.